Hi everyone, this is Arlen Salty, the co-director and co-founder of Break Forth Ministries. Before we jump into this episode, my wife Elsa and I would love to invite you to head over to breakforthministries.com, where you can find out about our live events, our tours to the Holy Land, resources, and so much more. And if you feel you'd like to help us out with the cost of putting Break Forth online out to the world for free, you can choose to support the ministry there as well. Don't feel pressure, but even $5 helps to keep us expanding this free library. Okay, let's get right to today's episode. Dr. Gary Chapman presents the 5 Love Languages. Dr. Chapman is the author of the 5 million selling 5 Love Languages, and he now brings you into a session that could revolutionize your marriage. Here you'll learn how to keep emotional love alive after you've come down off the initial in-love experience. Many couples live for years with empty love tanks. If we genuinely feel loved, though, life is beautiful. In this session, discover your spouse's love language and how to speak it in order to keep that love tank full. Okay, here is Dr. Gary Chapman.
Thank you, Ruth. Well, thank you. Anybody here ever lived in North Carolina where I live? Anybody ever been to North Carolina? Keep your hands up in case I need an interpreter. Ask these people, what did he say? All right, well, it's good to see you here. And we're going to be talking today about what I believe is the most important word in the English language and the most confusing word in the English language. I say that love is the most important word in the English language because Jesus once said, "This is the way that they can tell that you are my disciple, by the way you love each other." Maybe that's why we're not always recognized. But at any rate, nothing could be more important than that. It's the mark of the Christian. But I say that love is the most confusing word in the English language because we use the word love in 1,000 ways. We say, for example, I love hot dogs. Or in North Carolina, where I live, we say, I love barbecue. Then I hear people say, I just love the mountains. Oh, love the beach. Love my dog. Love my new car. Love my mama. And then we say to a special someone, I love you. Hot dogs and barbecue, and I love you. I'm not going to talk about 1,000 ways in which we use the word love. I'm going to talk only about 3 ways in which we use the word love, and I'm going to focus on the third of these. The first is what we typically call falling in love. Now, you don't hear a lot about this in church. I doubt you've ever heard a sermon on falling in love. If you want to learn about falling in love, you have to listen to country music. They're either falling in love or falling out of love, every other song. But I want to talk a little bit about this because I think we have a lot of fuzzy thinking. When young couples come to me for premarital counseling, I will sometimes ask, why do you all want to get married? Whatever else they say, they always give me the big reason. And the big reason is always the same. What do they say? Yeah, we love each other. Isn't that sweet? Then I ask them a very unfair question. I say, tell me, what do you mean by that? And that's when they reach over on the couch and hold hands and giggle and look around the ceiling and come back to see if I'm waiting for an answer, and I am. And whichever one talks the most, and always one does, one of them will say, well, you know. And I guess I know. I remember years ago, I went to my mother, and I said, Mom, how do you know when you're really in love. And my mother said what many mothers have said through the years. She said, son, if it's real, you'll know it. Now, folks, I like my mother, but that didn't help me at all. And the fact is, we don't help young people very much. Everybody seems to agree that the main thing you want to make certain of is that you are really in love. But nobody bothers to tell you how to figure that out. So I want to talk to you a little bit about the experience of falling in love. It all begins with a feeling. I call it the tingles. To me, that's much more descriptive. We get the tingles. All of us have inside of us a little love alert system, similar to a smoke alarm. And when you meet certain people, there's something about the way they look, the way they talk, the way they emote, that gives you a little tingle inside. In fact, it's the tingles that motivate people to go out and have dinner together. And you know that sometimes you actually lose the tingles on the first date. You find out something about them that you can't tolerate, and the next time they call you for a hamburger, you're not hungry. And that relationship never gets off the ground. But there are other people that every time you go out for a hamburger together, it gets tinglier and tinglier and tinglier. And one night, one of you will say something like this: you know, I think I could love you. We're testing the waters to see if they feel what we feel. And if they give you a positive response, such as, what would be so bad about that? Ooh, you have a tender evening. And the next time the moon is right, you are likely to say the words, I love you. And you wait for them to say, I love you too. Woo! Now you know you got it because you said it out loud. And from that moment on, you literally get obsessed with each other. You can't get them off your mind. You go to bed thinking about them. You wake up thinking about them. All day long you think about them. They are the most wonderful person you have ever met in your life. Now, your mother can see their flaws, but you can't. Your mother will say, honey, have you considered they haven't had a steady job in 5 years? And you will say, Mama, give them a break. They're just waiting for the right opportunity. Now, people ask me if this experience of falling in love is in the Bible. And the reality is that it is. For example, this is talking about Samson. It's in the book of Judges, chapter 14. It says, Samson went down to Timnah, and he saw a young Philistine woman. And when he returned, he said to his father and mother, I have seen a Philistine woman in Timnah. Now get her for me as my wife. He got the tingles, and in their culture, if you get the tingles, you turn it over to your daddy to work out the details. But his mother and father replied, isn't there an acceptable woman among all your relatives and friends, among our people? Must you go down to the uncircumcised Philistines to get a wife? And Samson said to his father, get her for me. She is the right one for me. He fell in love. You see, this is as old as Adam and Eve. People fall in love. People, I don't know if you've ever read the Song of Solomon. This is a book we don't read in church. But here's the way a man talks when he's in love. Now listen to this language. How beautiful you are, my darling. Oh, how beautiful. Your eyes are like doves. Your hair is like a flock of goats. That's pretty contemporary. Your teeth are like a flock of sheep coming up from the, flock of sheep coming up from the washing. Each has its twin. No one of them is alone. Apparently she had braces and got it all straightened out. Your lips are like a scarlet ribbon. Your mouth is lovely. Your temples are like the halves of a pomegranate. Your neck is like the Tower of David, built with elegance, and on it hang 1,000 shields, all of them shields of warriors. Your two breasts are like fawns, twins of a gazelle, that browse among the lilies until the day breaks and the shadows flee. And I will go to the mountain of myrrh, and I will go to the hill of incense. All beautiful you are, my darling. There is no flaw in you. That's the way you feel when you're in love. I mean, she is the most wonderful person you've ever met in your life. There's nothing wrong with her. And she feels the same about him. In fact, here's a woman who's in love. Listen to the way she talks. This is a Song of Solomon. You might read this book sometime. I wouldn't suggest more than a chapter a week. She says, my lover is radiant and ruddy, outstanding among 10,000. Line up 10,000 men and he'll stand out above all of them. His head is purest gold. His hair is wavy and black as a raven. His eyes are like doves by the water streams, washed in milk, mounted like jewels. His cheeks are like beds of spice yielding perfume. His lips are like lilies dripping with myrrh. His arms are rods of iron set with chrysolite, I guess it is. His body is like polished ivory decorated with sapphires. His legs are pillars of marble set on bases of pure gold. His appearance is like Lebanon, choice as its cedars. His mouth is sweetness itself. He is altogether lovely. This is my lover. This is my friend. Yeah, people have fallen in love through all the years. Now, I wouldn't be giving you any new information if I told you that you can get the tingles after you're married for somebody else. Ooh. Happens every day of the week. Things aren't going well in the marriage, okay? All they ever do is argue with each other or just stay away from each other. In a marriage like that, it started yesterday morning. Husband went to work. Could have been the wife just as easily. 8:30 yesterday morning, he did what he does every morning. He gets to work and he goes to get his coffee. But yesterday, this lady walked up to the coffee pot and said to him, "Good morning." Ooh. Kindest words he's heard in months. Good morning. 8:30 in the morning and her hair is combed. And she smells good. And right away, he feels a tingle. He goes back to work, and about 10:30, he sees her going for coffee, and he gets thirsty. "Are you new around here?" "Oh, what's your name?" "Oh, where are you from?" "Oh, you know my friend, he used to work over there." Little coffee pot conversation. And the next few days, he arranges for a few more coffee pot rendezvous. And if he thinks that she might be feeling what he's feeling, he will say to her, "How about lunch someday?" And if she's willing, they have a nice, innocent lunch. But on that first lunch, he's likely to tell her what it's like at his house, just so she knows where he's coming from. Married, but unhappy. And the next lunch, she tells him her story. Every woman has a story, a history. And then they have lunches rather regularly, and they talk about everything freely. And about 2 months down the road, he says to himself, don't know what's going on here, but I feel closer to this woman than I do my wife. We've been married 15 years, and I don't have anything else to say to her. But it's so easy to talk to this lady. And then he will say to her, "I know a really nice place for dinner if you would ever be interested." And if she is, he will take her to a nice restaurant. I mean one that has fresh flowers and candles on every table. I'm talking nice restaurant. And many times after that first dinner, they will have an after-dinner rendezvous. Ooh. And a few more dinners and a few more rendezvous, and he's saying to himself, oh man, I don't know how my mother is going to handle this. Oh, mama, if you only knew the truth. And if he has children, he will say to himself, I don't want to hurt my kids. That's the last thing I want to do is hurt my kids. And then he will say, but you know it couldn't be good for the kids to be in our marriage and see the way we treat each other. You know that couldn't be good for the kids. And if he's a religious man, he will say, you know, maybe God just brought this woman along to give me a taste of true love. And 2 months later, he leaves his wife and goes off with this lady. Why? Because he lost the tingles here. In fact, I can tell you what he'll say at that point. I don't think I ever loved her. We were too young, didn't know what we were doing. Never was right. Oh, but this lady, she's a 10. Now, his friends can see her flaws, but he can't. His friends will say, George, have you considered the woman's been married 7 times before? And George will say, give her a break, man. She married losers. I'm going to make the woman happy. She deserves to be happy. But you know what nobody ever told George? And he will never read this in a modern magazine. He will never see this in a modern movie. Only place you find this out is in the academic sections of the library. George doesn't go there. We've studied it, this in-love experience. Dorothy Tenney, Bridgeport, Connecticut, long-term study. You know what she found out? The average lifespan of the obsession is 2 years. Some a little longer, some a little less, average 2 years, and would come down off the high. And that's when George will find out why 7 other men left her, and she will find out that George is not Mr. Perfect, and the whole thing starts over again. Now, let's thank God that we come down off the high. Because if we did not come down off the high, you would have to close down business, industry, church, education, because you can't get anything done when you're in love. Being in love is next door to being insane. If you're in college and you fall in love, it's likely your grades will go down. You got a test on the War of 1812. Who cares about the War of 1812 when you're in love? But see, nobody told George that. George thinks he's got the real thing this time. Now, why would I even bring this up? Because every one of you sitting in this building has the potential of feeling the tingles at the coffee pot. I'd like to give you a little help on how to handle the tingles. The easiest time to handle the tingles, if you're already married, is that first morning at the coffee pot. I don't think it's a sin to feel the tingles. It's not premeditated. You don't get up one morning and say, I think I'll get a cup of coffee and get the tingles of whoever shows up. No. It's just that you are going to meet some people in your lifetime that there's something about the way they look, the way they talk, the way they emote that gives you a little tingle. I don't think it's sinful, but it's very dangerous if you're already married. So what do? When you feel the tingles at the coffee pot, you go back to work and you take the tingles to God and you say to God, oh, Lord, you know what I felt at the coffee pot, and you know the thoughts that ran through my mind. But I thank you that I don't have to follow the tingles. Now guide me as I go home and do my homework. And you go home and do what I'm going to teach you this hour, and that's the day you swear off a coffee. You don't go back to the coffee pot at 10:30. In fact, you don't drink coffee anymore. If she leaves the company, you can drink coffee again, but right now, you don't drink coffee. And if you happen to sing in the choir or on the praise team at your church, and you feel a tingle for somebody on the praise team, and you want to stay after rehearsals and talk, that's the day you ought to resign the praise team. And if you're on a church committee and you feel a tingle for somebody on the committee, that's the day you ought to resign the committee. Now, you don't say to the chairman, I'm going to have to resign because I feel the tingles. No. What you say is, I have been praying and I believe it's God's will for me to resign the committee. And I can tell you, it is God's will for you to resign the committee. The easiest thing is you don't let it happen. But what if you've already had the lunches, already had the dinners, already had the rendezvous, and you're already into what people call an affair and what the Bible calls adultery? What are you going to do with that? There's only one right thing to do with an affair. You break it off. Oh, but I'll die if we can't be together. No, you won't die. We've studied that too. Not a single person in this country or my country has ever died from breaking off an affair. Not one. A lot of folks died who didn't break them off. I did not say it was easy. It's not easy to break off an affair. Why? Because it is obsessive in nature. You do feel like you'll never be happy if the two of you can't be together. It's not easy to break off an affair. I didn't say that. I said it was right. But I've never met a man or woman who ever regretted doing right. But they're in my office and other counselors' offices all over your country and mine who did wrong 5 years ago. And now they're trying to get help on that second, third, or fourth marriage. Don't misunderstand me. I'm glad they're getting help. I'm going to do everything I can to help them. But it would have been a whole lot easier back upstream. Folks, listen to me. We've got to break this cycle of leaving this person and going off with this person when you lose the tingles here and you get the tingles here. If you follow the tingles, you could get married 6, 8, 10, or 12 times in a lifetime, just like they do in Hollywood. But you're not that rich. So what I'm saying to you is we have got to learn how to handle the tingles and not follow the tingles, and come back and re-engage in our marriage and learn how to communicate love to each other in the marriage. And that's the heart of where we're going in this lecture. But I bring that up because it's so prevalent, both in the States and in Canada. And people get swept away with the emotions of the tingles, and then they get obsessed with each other, and they think they'll never be happy if they don't follow that. And what happens 2 years later? They're back down in the real world, and now they're struggling in that second marriage or third. See, first marriages, 40% end in divorce. Second marriages, 60%. Third marriages, 75%. It doesn't get easier, folks. Now look, I'm not here to clobber anyone. I know that we have people here who've been married more than once. We can't go backwards. We can't unscramble eggs. We have to be where we are, okay? But what I'm saying is, wherever you are, let's learn how to make this marriage what God intended it to be. And let's follow the principles we're going to talk about today. All right, that's the first way we use the word love. Second way we use the word love is not nearly as exciting, and that is love as an attitude. That doesn't do much for you, does it? Love is an attitude. It's the attitude that says, I choose to look out for your interest. How can I help you? Now, we do a fair amount of teaching and preaching on this. This is the Greek word phileo, from which we get the word Philadelphia, the city of brotherly love. If you've ever been there, you may question that, but that's what the name means. We talk a lot about this, loving your neighbor, just looking out for your neighbor, loving people, being willing to do things for people. So I'm not going to spend a lot of time on this kind of love, but it's very important. We choose every day to be a loving person or not to be a loving person. We choose every day to love our spouse or not to love our spouse. to look out for their interests or not to look out for their interests. We choose to love our children or not love our children. We choose to love our neighbor. We choose to love the people we work with, or we choose not to love them. We're either looking out for people's interest or we're looking out for our own interest, and we're self-centered and selfish. But it's a choice we make every day. And it's important to know that it is a choice. We choose our attitudes. We don't choose our emotions, but we choose our attitudes. And attitudes and behavior affect emotions. But what I do want to talk about, and this is the one I want to focus on, is the emotional aspect of love. The emotional need that we have to feel loved. You see, we're made in the image of God, and the Bible says God is love. It's one of the essential characteristics of God, love. We're emotional creatures because God is emotional. All the emotions we have are reflections of God's love. And we are made with a deep capacity to love and to be loved. In fact, this is the heart of humanity, the image of God in humanity, is that we want to love people and we want to be loved. I like to picture that inside every child, there is an emotional love tank. And when the love tank is full, that is when the child genuinely feels loved by the parents, the child grows up normally. But when the love tank is empty and the child does not feel loved by the parents, the child grows up with many internal struggles. And in the teenage years, will go looking for love, typically in all the wrong places. But I believe that adults also have a love tank. And in a marriage, the person you would most like to love you is your spouse. In fact, if you feel loved by your spouse, life is beautiful. But if the love tank is empty and you don't feel loved by your spouse, life can look pretty dark. And much of the misbehavior of adults grows out of an empty love tank. You see, the person who has an empty love tank in a marriage will be far more tempted with the tingles at the coffee pot. It doesn't excuse the person for doing that and walking that road, but it explains emotionally why they can do that, whereas they would not have emotionally been moved to do that if they had a full love tank in the marriage. But here's the problem. What makes one person feel loved doesn't make another person feel loved. I remember the first time I encountered this in my counseling office. They were a couple that had been married for about 30 years, and they came in. And the wife said, "Dr. Chapman, I want you to know right up front that we don't have any money problems." She said, "I was reading a book that said that money is the biggest problem in marriage." She said, "Well, it's never been true for us. We don't argue about money. We don't have any money problems." And she said, "I want you to know that we don't argue. We don't believe in arguing. We don't like arguing, and we just don't ever argue." And she went on to tell me some other things about her marriage, and I'm beginning to wonder, why did they come in here to tell me what a good marriage they have? But then she started crying. Tears came to her eyes. And she said, "But Dr. Chapman, the problem is I just don't feel any love coming from my husband." She said, "It's like we're roommates. We live in the same house. There's nothing going on between us." She said, "I don't know if I can continue to do this." Well, I looked over at her husband, and he said, "I don't know what else to do. I do everything I know to do, show her that I love her. And she sits there and says she doesn't feel loved." He said, "I don't know what else to do." I said, "Well, what do you do?" He said, "Well, I get home from work before she does every day, so I start the evening meal." He said, "Sometimes I've got it ready when she gets home. Other times she gets home and helps me. We finish the meal," and said, "After it's over," he said, "I wash the dishes." And he said, "Every Thursday night I vacuum the floors." And he said, "Every Saturday I wash the car and I mow the grass." And he said, "I help her with the laundry." And he goes on. I'm beginning to wonder, what does this woman do? Sounds to me like he's doing it all. And as I do all these things to show her that I love her, and yet she still says she doesn't feel loved. He said, "Dr. Chapman, I don't know what else to do." Well, I looked back at her and she said, "He's right. He's a hardworking man. And then she started crying again. She said, but Dr. Chapman, we don't ever talk. We hadn't talked in 30 years. She said, he's always washing dishes, mowing grass. You understand what's going on? A sincere husband who is genuinely loving his wife, but she's not getting it. I believe there's thousands of couples just like that couple. They are sincere, but they're not connecting. I've been counseling probably 15 years, and I knew I was hearing the same stories over and over and over and over in my office. And I knew there was a pattern, but I didn't know what the pattern was. So what I did was to go through 12 years of notes that I made when I was counseling people. And I asked myself as I read the notes, when someone said in my office, I feel like my spouse doesn't love me, what did they want? What were they complaining about? And their answers fell into 5 categories. I later called them the 5 love languages. And I started using this in my counseling in helping people discover each other's love language. And it absolutely changed marriages. And then I started using it in small groups, and the same thing happened. And probably 5 years later, I said to myself, you know, if I could put this in a book and write it in the language of the common person and leave out all the psychological jargon and just talk in plain English, I could help a lot of people that I will never have time to see in my office. And that's how the book came about. And I think she mentioned earlier it sold over 7 million copies in English. It's now been translated in 49 languages around the world. The deep human need to feel loved, I think, is the success of the book. Now let me give you the 5 love languages. If you've read the book, this will be a review. If you haven't, it'll be an introduction. Love language number 1, words of affirmation. Using words to affirm the other person. 1 Corinthians chapter 8, verse 1. Love edifies. Love builds up. So one way to express love is to use words that build up the other person. You look nice in that outfit. I really appreciate what you did. Using words to affirm the other person. You can focus on their personality. One of the things I like about you is you are so optimistic. I really like that about you. You can focus on their character. One of the things I like about you is I know I can trust you. I really appreciate that. You can focus on the way they look. You can focus on something they've done, but you're using words to affirm them. My wife and I were visiting our daughter and our son-in-law and our 2 grandchildren. If I'm going to be totally honest, I would say we were visiting our grandchildren and the parents happened to be at home. But at any rate, after dinner that night, our son-in-law took the trash outside. And when he walked back in the house, our daughter said to him, John, thanks for taking the trash out. And inside I said, go, girl. You see, I cannot tell you how many men have been in my office over the last 35 years and said to me, Dr. Chapman, I don't ever hear any words of appreciation from her. I can do all kind of things, and if she says anything, it's about something I didn't do. And I can't tell you how many women have said the same thing. I give it all I've got, and he acts like I'm not even here. I don't ever hear any words of appreciation. You understand why the book of Proverbs, chapter 18 and verse 21 would say this? Life and death are in the power of the tongue. You can kill your spouse or give them life by the way you talk to them. Same thing is true with your children. You see, ladies, when you give your husband a positive word, there's something inside of him that wants to be better. And when you give him a critical word, there's something inside of him that wants to shoot you. I I remember when our children were little, my wife used to tell our children what a good father I was. I mean, she'd pour it on. She went way beyond reality. But do you know that every time she told them how good I was, it made me want to be as good as she said I was. You see, it motivates. Now, I know there are people, like a lady said to me some time ago, she said, Gary, I hear what you're saying, and I know it would be good if I could give my husband some positive words. She said, but to be honest with you, I can't think of anything good to say about the man. And I said, well, does he ever take a shower? And she said, well, yes. I said, how often? She said, well, every day. I said, if I were you, I'd start there. I appreciate you taking a shower. There are men who don't. I have never met a man or a woman that you could not find something good to say about them. So you look for the good. You see, some of you have fallen into the trap that every day you're telling your spouse what's wrong with them and what they ought to do, and you're complaining about what they didn't do, and you're literally driving them away. Look for something good about them and begin to give them positive words. And as their love tank fills up, they become better. But when you criticize them, they become worse. Words of affirmation. A second love language is gifts. Ephesians 5:25 says to husbands, love your wives as Christ loved the church and gave himself for it. In that illustration, Christ himself is the gift. My academic background is anthropology, cultural anthropology. Before I did theology and counseling, I did an undergrad and a master's degree in anthropology. We have never discovered a culture anywhere in the world where gift giving is not an expression of love. It's universal to give gifts as an expression of love. I was on the island of Dominica in the Caribbean. It's the only island where the Carib Indians still live. They used to be on all those islands, but now there's only one little reservation there. I met a man named Fred. Fred only had one hand. He lost his other hand in a fishing accident. Fishing with dynamite, not a good idea. And against the law in my country, and I think in your country. But I was there for a month, and I spent a lot of time with Fred, and he taught me a lot about his culture. But when I got ready to leave, he said to me, Mr. Gary, you leave tomorrow. And I said, yes, Fred, I'll leave tomorrow. He said, I would like for you to come to my house. I have a gift for you. And I'm thinking, gift? There's not a store within 30 miles of this village. How could he have a gift for me? But I went to his house. When I walked up, he said, Mr. Gary, would you like some juice? And I said, sure. He said to his little brother, go get Mr. Gary some juice. Well, his brother goes down the trail, climbs a coconut tree, and takes off a green coconut and brings it back and gives it to Fred. And Fred hits it 3 times with his machete and flips it open and hands it to me and says, juice for you. Well, I proceeded to drink the juice, some of it. And Fred said, I have a gift for you in my house. And he goes inside and he comes back out and he has his hand behind his back and he brings out a stick 18 inches long. It's crooked. All the bark is gone. It's very smooth. And he says, this stick has lived on the shores of Dominica for many years, and the waves have beaten it against the stones, and it's smooth. I want you to have it to remember Dominica. That was over 30 years ago. I still have the stick. I still remember Fred. Fred gave me a gift. Now, the gift doesn't have to be expensive. Haven't we always said it's the thought that counts? But I remind you, it's not the thought left in your head that counts. It's the gift that came out of the thought in your head. You know, guys, you can get flowers free in the spring and summer. Just go out in your backyard and pick one. That's what your kids do. How many mothers have ever received a dandelion from your kids? Yeah. Now, guys, I'm not suggesting dandelions, okay? You don't have any flowers in your backyard? your neighbor's yard. Ask them. They'll give you a flower. Or you could go to a funeral and ask the family. They'll give you a flower. I did that not long ago. I went to a funeral, and after the service, they had a luncheon for the family, and I went to the luncheon. And I walked into the church and where they were having the luncheon, and I noticed there were vases of red roses. So when I got ready to leave, I just said to one of the ladies, "Would you mind if I take one of those roses to my wife?" "Oh," she said, "Dr. Chapman, you can have this whole vase. I go home with 24 red roses." I told her where I got them. She still liked them. I was in Germany at the NATO base, and I had a free afternoon, and I was just walking across the base. And I came to a little picnic table, and there was a young man sitting on the table. I judged him to be about 13, and he was by himself. And so I just went up and engaged him in conversation, got his name, found out where he's from, and so forth. I noticed he had a little St. Christopher medallion around his neck. And I said to him, what is your medallion? He said, "It's St. Christopher." And I said, "Where did you get that?" He said, "My father gave it to me before he was deployed, and he told me to remember him when I wore it." I said, who was St. Christopher? And he said, he was some saint in the church. You see, it was pretty obvious to me. He didn't get much of the religious significance, but he got the emotional significance. My daddy gave it to me, and I wear it to think about him. You see, you can give a 13-year-old, you can give an 8-year-old boy, 13-year-old boy. You're walking across the city parking lot, and you pick up a stone, and you take it home and say to this son, "I found this today, and I thought about you. Look at the colors in this thing, man. Look at the colors in this. This is just a simple stone. Look at the colors in this thing. I wanted you to have it." If gifts is his language, I can almost guarantee you when he's 23, you'll find the stone in his dresser drawer with his socks, and he'll remember the day you gave it to him. Doesn't have to be anything expensive. It is the thought that counts. The third love language is acts of service. Doing something for the other person that you know they would like for you to do. 1 John chapter 3, verse 18. "Love not in word only, but in deed. Do something to show your love." Now, in a marriage, we're talking about such things as washing dishes, cooking meals, vacuuming floors, walking the dog, getting white spots off the mirror, cleaning the toilet, changing the baby's diaper. Woo, big act of service. Mowing the grass, shoveling the snow, cleaning the car, anything that you know the other person would like for you to do. You know the old saying, actions speak louder than words? For some people, that's true. Not for all people. But if this is their love language, then actions do speak louder than words. So you find out what would be meaningful to them, and you choose to do it. Number 4 is quality time. Giving them your undivided attention. I do not mean husband and wife sitting on the couch watching television. Someone else has your attention. I'm talking about sitting on the couch with the TV off, looking at each other and talking. Do you all have couches? What do you do with those things? Have you ever tried this? Sitting on the couch with the TV off, looking at each other. It can be scary at first. And talking to each other. Or the two of you taking a walk down the road and talking. Or going out to eat, assuming you talk to each other. Incidentally, have you ever noticed in a restaurant, you can almost always tell the difference between dating couples and married couples. Dating couples will look at each other and talk. Married couples sit there and you'd think they went there to eat. I went into a cafeteria some time ago at lunch. I just popped in by myself to get a quick bite. And there was a couple, I judged them to be in their mid-50s. They came in and sat down. And they were in my whatever. Anyway, I saw them. Line of sight is what I was trying to say. And I saw them. And I just watched them. They never said a single word the whole meal. I knew they were married. You see, if I sit on the couch with my wife and give her 20 minutes, looking, listening, interacting, I have given her 20 minutes of my life. And she's done the same for me. It's a powerful communicator when you give someone your undivided attention. Quality time. Number 5 is physical touch. We've long known the emotional power of physical touch. That's why we pick up babies and hold them and kiss them and cuddle them. And long before the baby understands the meaning of the word love, the baby feels love by physical touch. Now in marriage, I'm talking about such things as holding hands, kissing, embracing, the whole sexual part of the marriage, arm around their shoulder. Driving down the road, you put your hand on their leg. Sitting around the house and they walk by and you trip them. I'm kidding. I was in an airport on Saturday night some time ago. I do marriage seminars on Saturday, and I'm usually flying home Saturday night, and I was tired. I didn't feel like reading, and I was just sitting there and just watching. And this young couple came in and sat down several yards from me. They had not been seated 60 seconds before she reached over and started rubbing the back of his neck. And I thought, isn't that sweet? Look at that. Do you know that every one of you married ladies used to do that when you were dating? You did. I tell you what, ladies, if you're seated with your husband right now, why don't you see if you can still do it? It might hurt your arthritis, but give it a try right now. Come on, ladies, just give it a try right now. Just see if you can still do it. Yeah, see there, ladies, you can do it. And if you're married or engaged and you're with your spouse, why don't you stand up right now and just hug each other? And the rest of you just observe. Yeah, just hug each other. Yeah. This might be the best part of this whole hour. Now listen to me. Out of those 5 love languages, each of us has a primary love language. One of the 5 speaks more deeply to us emotionally than the other 4. Now, we can receive love in all 5 languages, but if we had to give up one, we'd give up this one, or this one, or this one, but not this one, because that's the one that really makes me feel loved. It's very similar to spoken language. Every one of us grew up speaking a language with a dialect. I grew up speaking English, Southern style. But everyone grew up speaking a language with a dialect. And that's the one you understand best. The same thing is true with love. Now, once in a while, someone says to me, I don't know, Gary, I think 2 of those are just about equal for me. And my response is, fine, we'll give you 2 love languages. We'll call you bilingual. But most of us have a primary love language, a secondary love language, and then the other 3 fall in line under that. Now listen to me very carefully. In a marriage, almost never does a husband and wife have the same language. It happens, but not very often. And even if they happen to have the same language, they'll have different dialects. Now, by nature, we speak our own language. Whatever makes me feel loved is what I'm going to do for my spouse. But if it's not his or her language, it won't mean to them what it would mean to me. Let's say that my language is words of affirmation, and what makes me really feel loved is receiving words of affirmation. So I get married. What am I going to do? I'm going to give my wife words of affirmation. I'm going to tell her how nice she looks. I'm going to tell her how much I appreciate what she does. I'll probably tell her a dozen times a day, I love you, honey. I can't tell you how much I love you. I love you so much. But if words is not her love language and acts of service is her language, but I don't ever do anything to help her, it's just a matter of time. She's going to say to me one night, you know, you keep on saying, I love you, I love you, I love you. If you love me, why don't you help me? And I will be blown out of the saddle. Because in my mind, I've been loving her. But in her mind, I have not been loving her. Because I'm speaking my language, not her language. So the key is that we must learn to speak the language of the other person. Now, someone says, Gary, yeah, I get it, but what if the love language of your spouse is something that doesn't come natural for you? And my answer, so you learn it. My wife's language is acts of service. One of the things I do for her is vacuum the floors. Now, you don't know me well, but I want to ask you, do you think that vacuuming floors comes natural for me? My mother made me vacuum all through junior high and high school. I couldn't go play ball on Saturday until I vacuumed the house. In those days, I said to myself, if I ever get out of here, one thing I'm not going to do, I am not going to vacuum floors. You could not pay me enough to vacuum floors. There's only one reason I vacuum floors. L-O-V-E. You see, when it doesn't come natural, it's a greater expression of love. My wife knows every time I vacuum the floor, it's nothing but 100% pure, unadulterated love. And I get credit for the whole thing. We were sitting around the other night, and my wife said, you know, honey, these blinds are getting dusty. I looked over the blinds and I said, they are, aren't they, honey? That's all I said. But I heard the lady. I cataloged it. So 2 mornings later, it was a Friday morning. I was getting ready to leave later that day to go do a marriage seminar. It's about 6:30 on Friday morning. I was in there vacuuming those blinds. And she stumbled in and said, honey, what are you doing? I said, honey, I'm making love. Big smile broke on her face, and she said, you have got to be the greatest husband in the world. Now, my love language is words of affirmation, so I said to her, tell me one more time, babe, how great am I? She told me again. I get on the plane with a full love tank. She goes back to finish her nap with a full love tank. Why? I spoke her language, and she spoke my language. You understand what I'm saying? You know what I believe? I believe there are thousands of marriages that could be saved if people understood and applied what I've just shared with you. In fact, every single week when I do marriage seminars, I have people come up and say, Dr. Chapman, we were that close to a divorce. And somebody gave us your book, and God used it to open our eyes. And we looked back on our marriage and saw how we had missed each other. And then we tried speaking each other's language, and it totally changed the atmosphere. Now, sometimes people say, Dr. Chapman, you think that'll help after 30 years? Yes. I have a couple that came to one of my seminars, and they came up and said, Dr. Chapman, we drove 4 hours to get here, and we really came to say thank you. Husband said, we've been married for 30 years. And if you want to know the truth, the last 20 years, we've been roommates. He said, we don't even take vacations together. We just live in the same house and try to be civil. He said, I was talking to a friend of mine one day, and he went in his house and came back, and he said, you need to take this book home and read it. And I said to him, I don't want to read a book. He said, man, I'm telling you, it'll help you. Just take it home and read it. He said, I threw it in the back seat of the car. Said several days later, I picked it up, sat down one night, and I started reading it. He said, I read the whole thing one night. Finished at 2 a.m. And I thought, man, why didn't I know this 30 years ago? Instead, I thought, I wonder if this would help now. So he said, I gave it to my wife the next day. And I said, honey, if you get a chance, could you read this book and tell me what you think of it? He said, 2 weeks later, she came back and said, I finished that book. He said, what did you think? She said, I think if we had had that book 30 years ago, our marriage would have been very different. He said, I had the same thought. He said, do you think it would make any difference if we tried now? And he said, she said, we don't have anything to lose. He said, does that mean you're willing to try? She said, yeah, I'll try. He said, we took the quiz in the back of the book, determined our primary love language, and we told each other, we're going to ask God to help us to express love to each other in the right language at least once a week and just see what happens. He said, if anybody had told me that in 2 months I would have love feelings for my wife again, I would never have believed it. And she spoke up and said, if anyone had told me that I would ever have love feelings for him again, I would have said it can't happen. But she said it did. He said, we took our first vacation together last summer in 20 years. Had a great time. He said, we drove up here the 4 hours together. He said, we love to be together. We love talking to each other. He said, it's just like our whole marriage started over again. You see, because we so desperately need love, when we try to speak each other's language, something happens inside of us that draws us to the other person. So what I want to do is challenge you to do this. If you haven't taken the quiz, I want to suggest you take the quiz. You can get a book and do it in the back of the book, or you can go online. It's free online, 5lovelanguages.com. Take the quiz and see what your love language is and share it with your spouse. Then I hope you will apply it not only in your marriage, but I hope you'll apply it with your children as well. After I wrote the original book, The 5 Love Languages, I wrote The 5 Love Languages of Children. I wrote that one with Dr. Ross Campbell, who is a Christian psychiatrist, 30 years experience with children, helping parents learn how to love children effectively. All parents love their children, but not all children feel loved. And then I wrote The 5 Love Languages of Singles, of teenagers. Teenagers are a different breed. How do you get through to them emotionally while they're going through all those physical changes, intellectual changes, emotional changes? How do you get through to them? And that's what I deal with in that book. And then later I wrote The 5 Love Languages Singles Edition. So many single adults said, I know you wrote your original book for married couples, but I read it, and it helped me in all my relationships. Why don't you write one for us? So I did. And I apply this concept to their relationship with their parents, their siblings, their college roommates, their work associates, their dating partners. Because in every human relationship, this principle helps people connect. Most recently, I wrote with Dr. Paul White, who is a psychologist with 20 years experience in business. We wrote The 5 Languages of Appreciation in the Workplace. Same languages, we're just taking them to work. We found that 70% of the people who work say they feel almost no appreciation from the people for whom they work. 64% of the people who leave one job and go to another say they left primarily because they didn't feel appreciated. So we're hoping that book is going to do for the workplace what the other books have done for marriage and family. This is a huge area in terms of human relationships. May I pray with you? Our Father, thank you that you have made us creatures capable of receiving love and giving love because we're made in your image. We know that we love you because you first loved us. Teach us to follow your example and not wait for our spouse to love us, but to reach out and love them. I pray, Father, that our marriages will be different. Our parent-child relationships will be different because we spent this time together. In the name of Christ, I pray. Amen. God bless you. Hope you have a good rest of the day. Thank you. Thank you.
Wasn't it a great blessing to hear from Dr. Chapman? If you'd like to learn more about Dr. Gary Chapman, please head on over to 5lovelanguages.com. Thank you again for listening. We're adding more and more to this free online library of great sessions all the time. So remember to check back to see all the new content. And also remember, please head on over to breakforthministries.com where you'll learn more about our live events, Breakforth Holy Land tours, and so much more. Okay, we'll catch you again for more sessions at Breakforth Online.